So again, you should be opened in your social studies notebook to the chapter 1, lesson 2 vocabulary words. And you should be open up to page 21 in your textbook. So the other day, we got all the way through the end of the Great Plains. We have a little bit more to talk about in the middle. And then we'll talk about the west. So remember, make sure that you are keeping track of all these things, these places, these specific places that we mentioned. Zadie, face shield on. Don't forget. Because you will see them again, and you will need to know where was it mentioned. Was it in the east? Was it in the middle? Was it in the west? But they were all mentioned. So, we talked about the map. We talked about all the different landforms we see in the United States. We talked about everything. Now we are talking about a mighty river. So, Cullen, please read. Start with a mighty river. Don't forget to read the subtitle, even though I just said it.
A mighty river. Hundreds of rivers flow through the United States. The mighty Mississippi River is one of the longest rivers in North America. It runs through the middle of the equator.
No. There's no Q, no E. Cover up T-E-R-I-O-R. Cover up I-N-I-O-R. Cover up everything but that second I. It sounds like a long E.
E.
What?
E.
And then cover up everything but O-R.
Or.
So we have I-N, in, ter, e, or. In, ter, e, or. But that should jog your memory to a word that we talked about last week. Doesn't sound exactly the same, but it sounds very close. Who remembers this word from last week? In, ter, e, or. Sounds like what, Zadie?
Interior.
Interior. And we talked about that last week. That was the entire middle of the country was the interior plains. And we had both parts. We had the central plains, and then in the east, which is kind of where we are. And then we had the Great Plains, which was the western part of the interior plains. So go ahead, read that sentence again, Cullen.
It runs through the middle of the interior plain.
Good. So next we have Mississippi River. Put that in your brain. Where is the Mississippi River? Is it in the east, in the middle, or in the west, Cullen?
In the middle.
How do you know that?
Because we're reading in the section in the middle.
Because we're still in the section in the middle. Good. So the Mississippi River runs right here. It runs through the middle of the interior plain. So on one side of the Mississippi River, we've got the Central Plains. On the other side of the Mississippi River, we've got the Great Plains. Cullen, keep going.
Like all rivers, the Mississippi starts at the highest place and flows to lower land. Its sources is a small lake in Minnesota.
I went there this summer on purpose because I was like, wait, we talk about this. We have to go there so I can tell my kids I went to the source of the Mississippi River. There was a big sign that said, turn this way to get to the source of the Mississippi River. So I went, and it's this like lake. It's not even that big. Doesn't seem that exciting, but it is. Okay, keep going.
The source of a river is the place where it begins.
Pause. What's our next word, Cullen?
Source.
Source. So we have number 4. Which is the word source. Make sure you are spelling it correctly. And what is the source of a river? Cullen?
Of a river that
I already said, listen to what I said so that you're not repeating things. The source of a river is what? So would you say of a river is? No, because I already said it. So the source of a river is what?
The place where it begins.
Good. So source is the place where a river begins. And in this case, this river, I can't remember what it's called. I'm sorry, this lake where the Mississippi River begins, can't remember what it's called. It's not that impressive, the lake itself. But this massive, mighty river, as our book calls it, starts in this not that impressive lake. So it's kind of crazy how that can happen. So the source is the place where a river begins. Keep going.
From the lake, the Mississippi flows south for 2,340 miles.
Good. So if we look at the diagram on the top right of page 21, this is showing the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River itself is that really thick blue line right down the middle of this diagram. It starts up at the source in the in Minnesota. You can see where there's like a little round inset picture with the word source towards the top. Make sure you're finding source, not mouth or tributary, because we're not looking at those words yet. Find source on that map. We can see that's where the Mississippi River begins, the source of the river. Then we can see that it flows down from Minnesota all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Well, there's more things we need to know about when it comes to a river. Michaela, read next. Louder.
Along its route, the Mississippi is joined by many tributaries.
Let's chunk it. We've got this word. Let's chunk it. So, Michaela, in your book, cover everything up except for the first 4 letters. And how would you say that? Trib. Cover up everything but the U. That is a long U. U. Cover up everything but TAR. Tear. Now, IES, how would you say that? It sounds like Y with an I, with an S at the end. I'm sorry, it sounds like the letter Y at the end. But how do we say if a Y comes at the end? How do we say it? We don't say it like Y or ya. If a Y comes at the end of the word, how do we say it? Who can help her out? Colin? E. IE also makes the sound E. So if we add an S to the end, we have, if we add an S to the end of long E, what do we have? Ease. So trib, U, tear, ease. Put it all together and it makes an exact word. Trib, U, tear, ease. What is that word, Michaela? Tributaries. Very good. Now in the next sentence, you say the exact same thing minus the S sound.
A tributary is a river or stem.
What is that word?
Stream.
Stream. Don't forget the R.
Stream that flows into a large lake. Together, a river and its tributaries.
Tributaries.
Tributaries make up a river system.
Okay, pause. Nobody should be writing. We have not stopped to write yet, so that means nobody should be writing. But we did forget. Sorry, Michaela, what is our next word? Number 5. Tributary. So number 5, please do not write the definitions because you think you know. Oh, we're going to write the definition yet next. So I'm going to go ahead and write it because I may add more definitions between, or you may miss a discussion that we have in the meantime. So make sure that you are not writing until it's time. So number 5 is tributary. Remember, sometimes when we make a word that ends with Y, plural, we change the Y to IE and add S. We're going to talk about that, I think, next week. So tributary. What is a tributary, Michaela?
A tributary is a river or stream.
Not steam. What is that? Don't forget the R.
Stream that flows into a large river system.
Good. A tributary is a river or stream that flows into a larger river. So a tributary is a smaller river or stream that flows into a larger river. So if you look at this diagram of the Mississippi River, well, we talked about the source up at the top. I'll stop so that, because I want you to be looking at this diagram, otherwise the words don't mean anything. So when you're done writing, make sure that your notebook goes underneath your textbook so that I know that you're ready. And then Zari, can you please tilt your camera so that I can see you as well as what you're working on? Thank you. There you go. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so look at the diagram. What? It's in your book. It's in your book. This exact definition is in your book. Okay, so now look at the diagram on page 21. We see the Mississippi River. It's that darkest blue line going right down the middle. We see the source up at the top. The source is the place where a river begins. Now we see all these little blue lines coming off of that big blue line. Those are the tributaries. Zari, make sure that you're paying attention to your book, not your background. Those are the tributaries, all those little rivers and streams that are coming off the main one. They are actually flowing into the Mississippi River. So we see the Missouri River is a tributary. It is a smaller river that flows a little through Missouri and Iowa into the Mississippi River. We see the Ohio River and the Tennessee River to the east. They actually flow into each other and then into the Mississippi River. Then to the west, we see the Arkansas River that does start over here and flows through Arkansas into the Mississippi River. And then we see the Red River that flows from Texas through a little bit of Arkansas and down into Louisiana to the Mississippi River. So on this diagram, we've got the source where it starts up here in Minnesota. We've got those tributary rivers. Those are smaller rivers that flow either from the east into the river, into the Mississippi River, or from the west into the Mississippi River. And Michaela, keep going.
Some major tributaries of the Mississippi River system include the Ohio,
Missouri,
and Arkansas rivers.
Good. So we can see all of those. We can see the Ohio River to the east, and we can see the Missouri and the Arkansas rivers to the west. And they all flow into the Mississippi River. That's part of what makes the Mississippi River so big, is there are a lot of tributaries. So even though the source is like a kind of small lake up in Minnesota, because there are so many tributaries, that's a lot of water flowing into this one river, making it really, really big. Okay, Michaela, read that last paragraph, and you'll notice the last paragraph looks like it ends, but if you go over, there is a new column. It's just kind of, you don't notice it right away. So go ahead.
The Mississippi River system brings rain and melting snow away from the surreal.
Let's look at that word. First of all, take off ing. Does that help you? So first we're going to start out, whenever we see ed or ing at the end of a word, take off that ed or ing and see if that helps you. Does that help you, or do we need to chunk it a little more? That's okay if we do.
A little more.
Okay. up everything but S-U-R. How would you say S-U-R? Sir. Cover up. Now there's two R's, so only cover up one. So cover up S-U-R and I-N-G. Round. And then we have ing, which makes the sound what? Ing. So we have sir, round, ing. What is that word? Surrounding. Very good. So what that means, another reason the Mississippi River is so large is because what do we get a lot of up in the north when it's cold? What do you get a lot of? Zadie? Snow. And what happens to snow when it gets warmer? Well, it's got to go somewhere, right? If there's a ton of snow, like feet and feet and feet of snow, does it all just melt and get soaked into the ground? No, it starts flowing to low land. Well, rivers are usually lower than the area around it. So that melted snow starts flowing into the Mississippi River. So then it gets really big. Do you remember? You guys probably don't remember because you were like tiny little babies, which is crazy to me because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. Do you guys remember hearing about how the Mississippi River flooded?
Yes.
Like a lot. Up onto Beale Street. That's because there was so much snow up here that and it was late in the season too. Like there was a lot of snow in like April, and it melted and flowed into the Mississippi River, which is already massive and has lots of water flowing into it from tributaries. Well, all of those tributaries got really flooded because of all the extra snow and rain. And then those flooded tributaries flowed into the Mississippi River, which even though we didn't get any snow really at all, barely any, we got all that melted snow here, which caused it to flood all the way up onto Beale Street. You guys were tiny little babies. If you were even born. No, you were born.
What year?
2011.
I was born.
I was 2.
Yeah, you guys were born. Yes, you guys were all born. The only people that may not have been, Carla, you weren't born yet. Anybody in May?
No.
No, Carla, you weren't born yet. Oh my gosh, it doesn't feel like that long ago. I'm not saying that you guys are young. It's just, it doesn't feel that long ago, but it was. Okay, so, melting snow and rain also flow into the Mississippi River. This is a lot of water. That's why it's so big. It starts in this little lake that's like nothing impressive at all. I saw it. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't quite a pond, but it wasn't anything super exciting. But because of all these tributaries and all of that melted snow and that rainwater that flow into the river, it ends up massive. Michaela, keep going.
It then carries this water all the way to the river mouth at the Gulf of Mexico. The month of
Not the month. That's not an N. That's a U. O-U. When you put them together, you usually say ow. If you put O-U together, well, it depends. Like round. So we have R-O-U-N-D, which is round. So M-O-U-T-H would be mouth.
the mouth of the river is the place where it empties into a large body of water.
Okay. So we've got the source, which is where the river begins. Tributary, which is a stream or river that flows into a larger river. And then our next word is what, Michaela? Mouth. And when we're talking about the mouth of a river, what is it?
The mouth of a river is the place where it empties into a large body of water.
So the mouth is the place, don't write where it, because you need to know what is it. The place where a river, that's the only thing we're changing it to a river. The place where a river empties into a larger body of water. So basically, the source of a river is where it begins. The mouth of a river is where it ends. So in this case, the Mississippi River, the source, is this little lake up in northern Minnesota. You can see it on your diagram. The mouth is all the way down at the bottom of the country, where it empties into what larger body of water? What body of water does the Mississippi River empty into? Carla?
The ocean.
What part of the ocean specifically? Smith?
The Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf of Mexico, which we do know is part of the Atlantic Ocean, but it's got its own name. Ooh, Gulf of Mexico. Is that common or proper? Victoria? Proper. How would we capitalize that? Don't look. Guess. Gulf of Mexico. How would we capitalize that?
Make the G uppercase, we make the O lowercase.
Why are we making the O lowercase if it's part of a proper noun?
Because it's not really,
What word is it a part of?
it's,
What O is part of what word? In Gulf of Mexico. Of. Is of that important? No. Is that it?
no,
What else would we do?
we make an N uppercase.
Good. Good. Very good. So we can see the Mississippi River is massive. It's very long. It's very wide in many, many parts because even though its source is this small lake, it's got lots of tributaries. There's lots of snow, melted snow and rainwater that drains into the Mississippi River. So it is able to be so long from basically the top of the country all the way to the bottom of the country. Where it empties, its mouth is where it empties into the Gulf of Mexico. Very good. I have a question. What is a river system? Real quick, what is a river system? Victoria, I see you, but let's see if there's somebody else. What is a river system? Victoria, did you find it in the book? Around where? Did you find? Don't tell me the answer because I want to give some other people a chance. But maybe you can give them a hint about where to look. Did you have to change the page?
Yeah.
Did you have to look at something we'd already read? I mean, like before today. No. Where is it? What paragraph? What section is it in?
It's on
In what section?
and
What's the name of this section?
my
A mighty river. Third paragraph. A mighty river. Zari, what is a river system?
Tributary is a river of streams that flow into a large river.
Okay, well that doesn't tell me what a river system is. That just tells me what a tributary is. What is a river system? Kingston?
A river system is a bunch
Louder.
A river system is a bunch of tributaries in a river putting together.
Very good. Very good. A river system is a river and its tributaries together. So we're looking, if we look at this diagram on page 21, we're looking at one river system. We're looking at the Mississippi River system. Kingston, did you have to pull that out of nowhere? Where was that answer? Right in the book, where Victoria said, right? Exactly where Victoria said. So see, I'm not asking you stuff that you don't already know. Sometimes I will, but I'll tell you that we're making inferences. In this case, we didn't have to make an inference. We could use keywords in that right there strategy. We could find the word river system, point to it, and right around there it tells you what it is. Very good. Okay, we've got like 25 minutes. We can make it. Turn the page. So now we're done with the east and the middle. Now those things it mentioned, is that the only things to talk about in the east and the middle of the country? No. Uh-oh. Where'd Zari go? Hopefully she's able to come back. No, definitely not. It is huge. There is lots and lots of things, but keep in mind all these specific things that they're mentioning because you're probably going to see them again. Okay. Yes. Okay, so now let's look at page 22. And Miss Folis, go ahead and read. Please make sure that you are following along. Oh gosh, I'm losing my breath. In the West. So are we still, where are we now? Which part of the country? Here, here, or here? Zadie. The right, the middle, or the left?
The left.
The left, because if we're looking at a map, the west is to the left. Okay, in the West. Traveling west from the interior plains, you see many different landforms. There are tall mountains, deep valleys. Valleys, remember, is the land between mountains. Green forests, vast deserts, and miles of rocky coastline. Carla, what's going on? Carla, are you good? Did it fall? Okay. So in the east, we've got some landforms, but if we go to the west, we get even more landforms. Like, we have some mountains, but not like they have out west. We don't really have deserts in the east or the middle even. There's really no deserts. There's some deserts down in Texas, like in where we're reading about in Holes. They're in the desert. They're in Texas. But for the most part, you don't get to deserts till you get all the way to the west. The Rocky Mountains. The first mountains you see in the west are the Rocky Mountains. Where are the Rocky Mountains? Victoria.
In the West.
How do you know that?
Because the bigger one that it says in the West.
Very good. These mountains are also called the Rockies. They form North America's longest mountain range, or group of connected mountains. The Rockies stretch more than 3,000 miles from Mexico all the way up to Alaska. So before, the other day, we were talking about the Appalachian Mountains, which stretch from Canada down into Lake Alabama. They don't go all the way, but they don't go all the way through the country because they end like in the middle of Alabama, maybe more north. But the Rockies go all the way from way, way up in Canada all the way down into Mexico. So the Rockies are so long. They go down the whole country. The Rockies are spread throughout 1, 2, 3 countries. The Appalachians are just 2. So they are very long. They are more than 3,000 miles long. Okay, so we learned that the Smoky Mountains were old. How do we know the Smoky Mountains are old? What characteristics about, this was from the other day, let's see who remembers. What characteristics about the Smoky Mountains told us that they were old? Sorry, we're on page 22 now. You can catch up later but you might be able to just read and talk about it, like do it yourself later. What characteristics did the Smoky Mountains have that told us that they were old? Not asking, this is not coming out of nowhere. Where were the Smoky Mountains? What mountain range were the Smoky Mountains a part of? Raise your hand if you remember. Smith.
The Appalachian Mountains.
The Appalachian Mountains. So where should you look to figure out how we know that the Smoky Mountains are old, Smith?
There's a map on page 20 with the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay, but is that where we're going to look to figure out how we know that they're old? Or should we find the key word, the Appalachian Mountains?
Find the keyword.
And is it on page 20? Where's the key word, Appalachian Mountains? Carla?
It's on page 19.
Page 19. And Carla, did you find what about the Smoky Mountains in the Appalachian tells us that they're very old? What characteristics do the Appalachians, specifically the Smoky Mountains, have that tell us that they are very old? It's not even on that page, Victoria.
This chain of mountains stretch more than.
Okay, well, Carla, that tells us that they're long. But what tells us that they are old? Kingston? Louder.
The Appalachians are the oldest mountains in North America.
Okay, that just tells us that they're old. What characteristics can tell us that they're old? Zadie?
Say, it's very tall over time. Rain and wind have worn them down their peaks.
So, we can tell they're old because over time, rain and wind have worn down their peaks. So are they tall? Are the Appalachian Mountains very tall? No. Are they like jagged, like what we think of when we think of like snow-covered mountains? No. They're very rounded and covered in forest. Well, now, let's read about how they're different from the Rocky Mountains. The Rockies are different. They are not old. Oh. I'll put it back because I just picked Zari's. Okay, Zari, sorry about it. Hopefully it gets to working. Hopefully it gets to working better. But Zadie, go ahead and read next. We just talked about how the Appalachians are really old, and we know that because they're very rounded and they're not very tall, because over the many years, rain and wind have worn them down. But then, now we're talking about the Rockies, and they are different. So Zadie's going to tell us about the Rockies. We're on the second paragraph under the section called the Rocky Mountains. So not that first block of text, but the second one. Zadie, go ahead, loud and slow.
The Rockies are young mountains. They are steep, rugged, and tall. Wind and water have not yet worn down their peaks. More than 40 peaks in Colorado are higher than 14,000 feet.
Good. So, how are the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains different? How are they different? Smith?
The Appalachian Mountains are kind of rounded.
Why are they
And-
rounded? Because they are...
Because the wind and rain has worn them down.
Because they are old. How is that different from the Rocky Mountains?
And the Rocky Mountains are still a little pointy at the top.
Very good. And they're also really tall. Why is that, Smith?
Because the wind and rain hasn't worn them down, and they're very steep.
Good. Because they are younger. The Appalachian Mountains are very old. Very, 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 very old. So they've had lots of time for the wind and the rain to wear them down so that they're short, they're rounded, they're not jagged, they're mostly covered in trees. But the Rocky Mountains are young, so they haven't had enough time for the wind and the rain to wear them down. So they're still very tall, they're very jagged, they're very steep. Good. Zadie, keep going.
The west of the Rockies. West of the Rockies, you can see that the land gets lower. You are now in the Intermountain region, or the land between mountain ranges.
Good. So we just crossed the Rocky Mountains, which kind of go up like this. So we just crossed. Now we're over here in the Intermountain region, which is much flatter because it's between mountain ranges. We've got the Rocky Mountains here, and then we move into this kind of a little bit flatter area called the Intermountain Intermountain region because we're kind of between mountain ranges. Thank you, Zadie. Please read next. Carla, loud and slow.
Width of the Rockies.
We already read that. Zadie just read that. We're at the Great Basin.
The Great
Basin.
of
The The Great Basin.
Great Basin. The Great
Basin.
covered
Basin, Carla. Basin.
The Great Basin covered the middle part of Intermountain region.
Good.
A
Basin.
basin is a low bowl-shaped land with high ground around it.
Okay, pause, Carla. What is our next word? I have to erase these to fit it.
Basin.
So number 7 is the word basin. And what is a basin, Carla, when we're talking about land? What is a basin?
A basin is a low
It's low,
land.
bowl-shaped,
Bowl-shaped land with higher ground around it.
good. So it's low, bowl-shaped land with higher ground around it. So it's almost the opposite of a mountain or a plateau. Because, we'll say a plateau, because a plateau is like this, but really, really big. Where it's a high, flat top, whereas a basin, Carla, go ahead and mute yourself. Don't forget to mute yourself, Carla. And then a basin is the opposite, where it's got higher ground around it, and then it kind of goes down like a bowl. And this is a basin, but it's massive. Like, you can't see the edges of the bowls, like a plateau. You can't really tell where the plateau starts and finishes. Same with the basin, because it's really, really big. But you've got mountains around it. That's what makes the area around it higher. So this Great Basin is kind of right around here. This is around where the Great Basin is, in like southern Idaho, southeastern Oregon, Nevada, and a little Utah. That's around where the Great Basin is. Okay, Carla, keep going. Oh, remember the Great Basin. Where's the Great Basin? Where is the Great Basin? Kingston? How do you know it's in the west? Loud. Come on. Because it's in the section in the west. Okay, Carla, keep going. It says the Great Basin. Oh, don't forget to unmute yourself.
The Great Basin has some of the driest and lowest land in North America.
Good. Keep going. So we're in the Great Basin right now. Right around here. Sorry. Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona. That's about where the Great Basin is. Okay? Keep reading to us.
The Great Basin lies between Alabama,
Columbia.
Columbia,
Carla, go slow. Read the whole word. Don't just guess it. You gotta read it. Don't guess. Otherwise, it'll make no sense.
Columbia, Plateau in the north, and the Colorado Plateau in the south.
So to the north is the Columbia Plateau up around here. To the south is the Colorado Plateau down here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Much of the land is on both plateaus is carved into a canyon.
A canyon is a deep, narrow valley with steep sides.
Good. And I like how you corrected yourself. So good job. That means you're going slow and you're really reading what you read. Okay, so what's our next word, Carla? What's number 8?
Our next word is canyon.
And what is a canyon?
A canyon is a deep, narrow, valley with steep sides.
Good. So a canyon is kind of like a valley, except that it is much deeper and is much narrower. And it has very steep sides. So a valley, when we just think about a regular valley, it usually just kind of gradually goes down. And it's usually very wide. But a canyon is very steep. It just drops suddenly. And it's narrower, kind of like the Grand Canyon. Okay, thank you, Carla. Don't forget to mute yourself. And then read next. Zari, you think you can do it? It's Pacific Mountains and Valleys. Can you do it? Or do you think you're having too much trouble? It'll cut out.
I think I can because I have to redo it.
Okay, so we're at Pacific Mountains and Valleys. And even though I just said it, make sure you say it too. Oh, wait, sorry, pause. Because if we look down at the bottom, we see an example of a canyon, the Grand Canyon. It's very deep and it's large. It stretches 280 miles across the Colorado Plateau in Arizona. It is massive. It is very steep. You can't walk down the side of the Grand Canyon, otherwise you will fall. Okay, now go ahead, Zari, keep going.
Pacific Mountains and Valleys. More mountains lie west of the Intermountain region.
Yep, so here we're in the Intermountain region, in the Great Basin. Now we're moving to the west, where we will find more mountains. Go ahead, Zari.
The Syria.
Oh, read the pronunciation key. It tells you how to pronounce that whole thing.
Sierra Nevada.
Very good. Sierra Nevada, which is around, it's down here. Sierra Nevada mountains are down here. What else?
Cascade
Range,
and
which is up here. And
Coast Range,
which are along the coast. Okay, keep going.
Runs through California, Oregon, and Washington. The coast ranges give the western coast of the United States of...
Hey, so it's coast. Coast.
The coast range gives the western coast of the United States a rocky, rugged.
It looks like rugged. It should be rugged, but it is rugged.
Rugged look.
So that's why we talked about how on the East Coast, the beaches aren't really rocky because they do have the coastal plains. Even though they're very narrow, they are pretty flat. But in the West Coast, they aren't, especially up in the northern West Coast. It's very rocky. Sometimes you have massive cliffs. There is no beach because there's just a massive cliff, and then down below it is ocean. Keep going. That's what they mean by rocky, rugged look.
In Alaska, the Alaskan Range has the highest peak in North America, Mount McKinley. McKinley.
McKinley. That's actually not called Mount McKinley anymore. It's actually called Denali now. But if you see Mount McKinley later, what part of the country is that in, Zari?
North America.
What part of North America, or what part of the United States? Smith?
The West.
How do you know?
Because it's found in the section titled In the West.
Very good. Okay, Zari, keep going. Finish us off.
Broad valleys spread between many of the Pacific mountains. These valleys have rich soil that is good for growing crops.
Good. Let's look at that reading check question. What landforms cover the western United States? This is called reading check. So does that mean you have to pull it out of nowhere? Should be in our reading. So, what landforms cover the western United States? Find it. Use that right there. Look for landforms, western United States. Point to it. Tell me, because you gotta tell me how you found it, how you found your answer. If you're only looking in one place and you're not seeing it, well, then you're not using all your tools. Because if you're looking in one place and you don't see it, well, don't keep looking at that same place expecting it to appear. Everybody should be looking. What landforms cover the western United States? Zadie?
The Rocky Mountains.
Is that a landform or is that the name of a mountain range?
The name of the mountain range.
So, I'm asking what landforms cover the western United States? We're not going anywhere until we get this answer, so if you're not helping by looking for the answer yourself, you're not helping us get there faster. Carla, what landforms cover the western United States?
The Coast Range.
You're naming mountain ranges. I'm not asking about mountain ranges. I'm asking what landforms cover the western United States. Look for the key words, landforms and western United States, or west. Look for the key words, landforms and west. Michaela?
Interior plain.
You are naming a part, and that's not even part of the west. Where are the interior plains? The interior plains are in the middle. We're talking about the west. It is right in front of you. It's there. We don't even have to turn a page. Look for the key word, landforms, and we know we're in the west. I'm not looking for the name of a mountain range. Remember what a landform is. If you can't remember what a landform is, look at your vocabulary words. Landform was one of our vocabulary words. Victoria? Are you guessing? Where do you see that? Where? Read me, tell me exactly what it says about landforms. Okay, well you found the word landform, but does that list what landforms cover the West? No, it just mentions the word landforms. But that's the key word, so where do you think the answer probably will be? Somewhere around there. It's not in that sentence. Guys, it was in the introduction to the West. Look at the very first paragraph under In the West. It says, traveling west from the interior plains, you see many different landforms. Well, that's the key word, landform, and we're in the West. So we know the answer must be around there. If it's not in that sentence, we should keep going. There are tall mountains. Is that not a landform? Look at the definition for landforms. Look at the definition for landforms. Features such as mountains, hills, valleys, and plains. If we look back at that first sentence, hands down, or that first paragraph, it says there are tall mountains. So we know that's a landform. It says it's in the west. Deep valleys. Well, valleys was another word that was in the landform, and this is saying it's in the west. Green forests. Vast deserts. Miles of rocky coastline. So, what landforms cover the western United States? Mountains. We also, valleys. We read about basins, plateaus, and canyons. So did I ask you to pull that information out of nowhere? It is all in your book. You just have to know how to look for it. Look for those key words. Okay, really quick. Read the summary of this chapter, of this lesson. Smith. This is the main idea of this whole lesson.
Summary. The United States has many different landforms. Some parts of the country have tall mountains. Other parts flat plains and plateaus or deep valleys and canyons. The United States also has long coastlines and many large rivers and lakes.
Good. So the United States has pretty much every landform you could want to see somewhere in the country because it is so huge. Some countries only have one type of landform, maybe two, because they're small, but the United States is massive. So we have something for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to get out your homework. Girls at home, you should already have it, so go ahead and get it out. It's called the American Landscape. So go ahead and look at your homework. It is front and back. On the front, you have a map. The map might be kind of hard to read. So girls, make sure that you're looking at the map. The map may be kind of hard to read, but you've seen a map that's very similar to this. Where did you see a map that was very similar to this? It's not exactly the same, but it is very similar. Smith.
In our book.
Where in your book? What page? Do you remember? Michaela? Not page 17. Let's see. There is a map on page 17, but is it similar to this one? Other than that, it shows the United States. Zadie.
Page 20.
Page 20. We see a similar map. It has landforms. So does this one. So try to use this one. But if you cannot see the difference, look at the map on page 20 in your textbook. So you might want to take your pencil and write page 20. Use this one first, because this one is a more detailed version of the one on page 20. It's not like the science book where they're exactly the same. They are a little different. So use this one first, but if you're really struggling, especially you at home, people at school, it's pretty clear. But you guys at home, I could not get the scan, like the picture, because I have to scan it, and I just couldn't get it to look as clear as if I were to make a copy of it. So try this one. You guys at school should be able to use this. You should have no problems using it because you can clearly see, as long as you pay attention, the difference in the patterns. You just have to look closely. Those of you at home, some of them, like mountains and plains, are really hard to tell the difference. So try your best if you really can't do it. And then with your printer, I'm not sure if it got even worse. So try your best on here. If you can't, look at it on page 20. Because numbers 1 through 6 are going to be about this map. Then if you turn to the back, this is why I said put those places in your head. Because you're matching each one to what part of the country it's in. Is it in the east, the middle, or the west? Every single one of these places was mentioned in the book. Every single one of these places was mentioned in the book. So you have to figure out, was it mentioned in the section about the east, the section about the middle, or the section about the west? Put an E for east, M for middle, W for west. Pay close attention. That's your homework. Go ahead and put that in return to school. It is due tomorrow.